by our TD for Mayo, an education spokesperson, Rose Conway-Walsh. Rose, one of the problems that many students in third level education experienced during earlier lockdowns was that because of public health restrictions, they weren't able to access their rental accommodation. And unfortunately, because they're not fully protected by the law, they weren't given refunds for accommodation that they couldn't occupy. Tell us a little bit about some of the families and students that you would have been talking to who were affected by that last year.
Yes, it was a constant battle. It was a battle right from the beginning, if we go back to March, where people had paid in advance, students and families had paid in advance for accommodation. And obviously they went to look for that money back, because that money was paid up front and they weren't getting anything from it. They were absolutely prevented by law from using the accommodation. And I do want to commend the landlords who straight away gave back the refunds and some of the campuses, but there were hundreds all over the country that didn't get that money back. So it was a constant battle of trying to get it back. Now you had these families who were really hard pressed financially already. Many of them had lost their jobs, their incomes had been reduced, the students themselves had lost their jobs as well. So we were dealing with households who were in severe financial pressure as it was, trying to look after other siblings as well. And some had, more than one student going to college. And the fact that they couldn't get money back for what they had paid for upfront the financial stress, but it was also the real sense of injustice for having paid for something and then being told, well, tough luck, you can't get your money back, so that's...
And of course, there are two things that add to that sense of injustice. The first, of course, is that if you're a non-student renter, just a regular renter in the private rental sector, and if you want to terminate your tenancy early, there is legal provision to do that. Sure, you have to give a month's notice, so you'll lose a month's rent. But in many cases, the students you're talking about and their families, they might have paid 3 months or 6 months rent in advance, and they were losing that full upfront payment. So certainly from the students I would have spoken to and many of the families, all they were asking for was fair play, for student renters to be treated exactly the same way as non-student renters, which is if they weren't able to take up the accommodation or if they had to leave early because the university closed campus because of COVID-19 restrictions, they would be able to give the same month's notice. And okay, so they might have lost the 4 weeks rent or 3 weeks rent in some cases, but they would have at least got the refund of the remaining 2 or 5 months rent. I mean, that's really the nub of this. It's the unfairness of how students are being treated differently to other renters and the fact that they're being asked to pay 3 months or 6 months in advance.
It really is, Owen, and that was it, because all they wanted was fair play. Fair play, thinking, oh yeah, why should students be treated differently to any other renter? Now, that's not to say that there's great unfairness in renters in general, but to be absolutely at the bottom of the pile in terms of how renters are treated. Why should they, there's no explanation for why students should be treated any different. Why they shouldn't be able to give their 28 days notice. Certainly they would lose a certain amount of money, but that they wouldn't be losing thousands. I mean, I've met families and students who have paid 6,000 and 7,000 euro. That is an awful lot of money. That is money that was got from grandparents, money that was got from moneylenders, money that was got from credit unions, borrowed money in many of the cases. So they were paying interest back on money that they had paid up front for something that they would never ever refuse any benefit from. And that's why this 28 days notice is really, really important. That's also why, Owen, that this has to be done as quickly as possible. As quickly as possible, because we cannot go in to another year and find that students are still in the same position as they were in at the beginning of this pandemic.
Of course, we do have some good news, which is the Union of Students of Ireland have led a really effective campaign to end both the unfairness of not being able to terminate a student tenancy early, but also the unfairness of having to pay 3 or 6 months in advance. The USI engaged extensively, both with yourself, Rose, as our higher education spokesperson, as well as with myself and other opposition parties. And together we have crafted a piece of legislation. That bill does 3 things. It allows students who either have to leave their student accommodation early or who can't take up that student accommodation in both instances because of public health advice to be able to give that 28 days notice and get a refund for the remainder. But it also outlaws the requirement of students to pay more than a month's rent and a month's deposit on taking up that licence. That bill, of course, has been taken in Sinn Féin private members' time. Thankfully, it has been signed by 56 TDs from a range of opposition groups, because, of course, this is a cross-party issue. So really, I suppose, maybe to conclude our discussion, can you just tell us what do we want people to do between now and next Wednesday when the debate takes place, and possibly the vote either at the end of that debate or the week after, and particularly those families and students who could be affected by this if, for example, we face further restrictions in accessing student accommodation? How can people ensure that this bill gets through and the rip-off of student renters is brought to an end?
Well, I want to commend the 56 TDs who have already signed the bill, and absolutely the USI and all of the unions and the students and the families who have been involved in bringing this bill to where it was. But now we really need it to pass, and we need it to go through as quickly as possible. I want families and students to contact their local TDs, particularly the government TDs, because we need them to pass it. Not to mess around with this bill. An awful lot of work has gone into it, as you said, not least by yourself and the USI. So we need it to pass, and we need families and we need students to contact their local TDs to ask them to support this bill going through, so we can get it through as quickly as possible, so we can stop the rip-off of students and hard-pressed families.
Well, look, Rose, thanks for taking the time out of your very busy schedule for the chat. I know you want to get back out to County Mayo to do the hard work that you're always doing on behalf of your constituents. But folks, the message is very clear. Students deserve fair play. Let's end the rip-off of student renters. Let's pass the USI Bill, and let's make sure that hard-working families across Ireland and their young people in university are treated just like every other renter. Fair play is all we want. Support this bill.